What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Planet Soccer channel here on YouTube. Second day in a row. If you haven't already, make sure you go check out our video we released yesterday. Buy or sell match week 13. Although our buy or sells at this point don't really have like a specific match week that they're
12.
Oh, 12. My bad. You know why I said that? Because in the folder that I save my files in, I put match week 13. So it's been stuck in my head. But today we're not talking Premier League. We are not talking anything really micro focused. We're going to dip our toes in the big kid pool and talk about a staple of club international football. We're going to talk about the academies and the youth development for clubs, how it's changing, where it came from, where we think it's going, and how at the end of the day, it's really not going to benefit the little guys, probably. Dylan, academies and youth development for me, it's one of those things, like long laundry list of things that draws me to soccer that we just don't have in America. I guess minor league baseball is the closest thing, but football, you're a 5-star prospect. You go to Alabama for 2 years, 3 years. You go to the NFL, you're a starter right away on a top division side, if you will. In soccer, it's not as straight and narrow. Harry Kane, one of the best strikers in the world, went on 7 loans before he was a permanent staple at Tottenham, which is unbelievable. I'm going a little bit on a tangent. I love this aspect of the sport. Dylan, as a Newcastle fan, you're not as ingrained in this side of the sport, but I know it's something that you find interesting.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Mike Ashley. No, I mean, like by default, like I'm not, because we don't have the academy established yet. And but it's something I certainly appreciate, and something that I think there's a lot of Newcastle fans right now out there that are extremely frustrated with where our academy is at. And we'll kind of dive into why money injection immediately doesn't lead to academy success, and why it is really a long game, why the likes of Ajax, Benfica of the world, the Chelsea's more recently of the world, have been able to establish such a powerhouse of academy sides, and why some of the newcomers like Man City, it's kind of wild because Man City's academy right now is borderline elite, but it's still behind the likes of the Chelseas of the world, because it does take so much time. That takeover took place over a decade ago now, and they're just now becoming elite. And it is a long, grueling process to develop an elite academy, but it's so incredibly, vitally important. I mean, like the fact that City's academy is so good that they had quote unquote had to get rid of Cole Palmer is one thing we'll probably dive into here as we go along. And that development, while it comes with riches and success, will also come with frustration, because you can't oversaturate your academy to the point where you have to make cuts at some point.
Yep.
But I do think academy, as we move forward, is going to be something, you touched on it in the intro, is going to allow the rich to get richer. And for the likes of a Spurs fan or a Newcastle fan or City or Arsenal or Chelsea out there, that is certainly promising. As a fan of the game, especially the English game, it is certainly a little bit concerning, and I'm kind of excited to dive into it. I know you are much, much more versed in the academies, and I'm kind of excited to hear what you got to say on this.
Yeah, so let's take a look at just kind of the natural birth of academies, and it obviously came from the lack of freedom of travel when the sport started. Everybody on all the club teams were local. There weren't really movements back and forth between countries, between leagues. So naturally, in the beginning, it was all homegrown, all academies, even though it didn't have a specific name. However, once international travel and international contracts and free agents, if you will, or transfers became commonplace, the first real group to do it was Manchester United with the Busby Babes in the 50s. And so at that time, buying players was very common, bringing the best players in from other teams. It was kind of that heyday, or the Renaissance, if you will, of bringing Brazilians to England or French to Germany or what have you. It was kind of cutting edge to say in that day, we're going to develop from within here. We're going to do this. And obviously Manchester United had great success through the second half of the 1900s. The quintessential academy, if you will, is Ajax. Dylan, before we came on, we watched the famous, at least to us,
best
absolutely incredible Twitter promotional video that Benfica and Ajax put out before their Champions League game 2 years ago. And it just lists all the guys that have come through those academies that have turned into all-time greats. Ajax and Benfica both come from those smaller countries, if you will. They're considered like great footballing nations. However, the financial might of those leagues is less so. So they're the ones that haven't been able to go buy the expensive players from overseas. They're the ones that develop them from within, then send them overseas. So that's kind of been the dynamic of academies for so long. And I think when you saw the success of the Ajaxes in the 1900s, that was bred from within. They weren't bringing in anybody. Even a lot of AC Milan's successes before the 90s came from building from within. I think once like tiki-taka and the Messi Ronaldo era came into effect, academies were very much actually put on the back burner. There was an influx of cash into the sport. America found the sport. TV contracts went through the roof. So you could just afford a lot more imports. However, we are seeing a shift in many different aspects, whether it's in England or across the continent, that are kind of, in a way, bringing the academies back to its roots, but also benefiting the rich still, who are already benefiting from being able to buy the most expensive players. Dylan, where I want to start here is just kind of to talk about why we think the rich are going to get richer. And it's kind of, do we do it last or do it first? I think it's important to do it first. Man City and Chelsea have been at the forefront of this for really Man City for the last 3 or 4 years, Chelsea for a while now, of developing players from within, but only a few of them would like really break through in a conventional fashion to those first teams. They were still bringing guys in from the Ajaxes, from the Benficas, from the Sportings of the world. However, we saw a transaction between City and Chelsea this summer, which you mentioned. It was essentially City's top prospect was sold to Chelsea, which felt weird as a soccer fan because it's like
your City.
Yeah,
why are you giving to Chelsea?
Exactly. But I think what that signifies is there's an arms race, and I know Cole Palmer's obviously not an academy player anymore. He's a team of the week every other week in the Premier League at this point. However, those kind of transactions on a smaller scale are taking place. You see over and over, more often than ever before, Man City has signed 15-year-old Brazilian to a youth contract. Real Madrid signed 16-year-old Portuguese player to a youth contract.
Oh, no, sorry. Endrick was the first one that, honestly, when I thought of Academy, came to my mind. And all of this is Endrick is absolutely tearing it up in Brazil at Palmeiras, and is now like the next great thing that Real is already getting their hands on. And that's just not something you necessarily used to see. You used to see those guys have to make a move to Benfica and go through the academy. Yeah. But now that these powerhouses are developing that academy, you get Endrick at, what was it, 50, 60 mil, which is peanuts to Real.
That's really the thesis of this portion of the episode. Clubs have started deciding to tell themselves, why would we wait 5 years to sign this guy for 100 when we can take him right now for 17, 25, even 40, and then we can develop him into that $100 million player without having to pay that extra $60 million. It seems like common sense, but what you run into and what we'll talk about later is you get kind of a saturation within your academy, and competition is good, but there are only so many positions on a football pitch. Competition is good to the point where you stunt people's growth. Yes, you can go out on loans, but I think systems are so important these days that if you send a player on loan to a French league and they end up playing this guy at right wing back, but he's a right winger for you, there's just a lot of disconnect. I feel like the teams that loan these players in don't have to follow a script. They're asked to, but the development is really out of the parent club's control. So a lot of these clubs have just decided to say, hey, we're just going to bypass that middleman, bring them in, get them ingrained in our system. Then we'll find the right one loan move, send him out, bring him back, and then he'll become a Cole Palmer. Dylan, how quickly do you think this is coming on? We see the clubs like Brighton who are selling their first team players for a lot. I think Brighton's academy is their first team. But if you look at academies in the Premier League, it's really only the top few. Spurs really even only this year have gotten a great academy. The facilities are there, but it took them a minute to catch up talent-wise. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I would argue there's only 4, maybe 5, like borderline elite academies in England right now, and I think a lot of that. There's a great intro to one of your Tottenham podcasts that touches on this. I think a lot of that in England specifically does have to do with Brexit and the difficulty to find loan moves.
Yep.
And are you going to be able to convince Endrick of Brazil to come in and just sit in an academy, or are you going to go to Real Madrid, who will put you in their academy for a year, maybe loan you out for a year, and then you're right back? And that's just not really an option right now due to Brexit in England, because you have to have so many work hours before you get a work visa to come over.
A lot of these guys can't even come over right away. They have to accumulate a certain...
Yeah, you almost have to get signed to an academy and loaned immediately rather than actually going to that academy. Yeah. And that's a really interesting wrinkle for the English game. And I think at its core, some English fans are probably in favor of it because it does highlight and put at the forefront English players in the English system, which is extremely attractive, obviously. But I also think it kind of has a chance to stunt the growth for those guys because they're not necessarily going to get those first team minutes anywhere because they can't get loaned out and come back when needed. So I think that aspect is certainly interesting. But the biggest thing is the money it takes, and kind of a overview of the brainchild of this podcast for me that I've decided to take on going forward is the business of football. And the business of an academy is losing money inherently. Like you will in this day and age, it will be losing money. If you want,
it's a non-revenue sport for a college, essentially.
Yes, exactly. It's baseball at Mizzou, where we want to have a good system, but it's going to cost a lot of money to make it a viable system. And to spend $60 million on a player that isn't going to crack your starting lineup for 4 or 5 years, why is that in Man City's best interest? Why is that in Chelsea's best interest when you do have financial fair play regulations in effect, and you are trying to compete in, arguably, in the most competitive league in the world. It is top to bottom the toughest league in the world. Week in and week out is the hardest to win easy matches, as we've certainly seen over the last few weeks in the Premier League with so many upsets. You just really can't afford to be spending money on stuff other than your first team or at least your bench spots to come in and alleviate some of that pressure off of your first team. So where is it in Newcastle's interest? Yes, the money is endless for Newcastle right now, but how can Newcastle financially compete with the Real Madrids of the world that make that just absorbent amount of money commercially, and they have the money to go drop 60-70 mil on this academy player? And Endrick is phenomenal, and he will be a top talent in the next 2 or 3 years. But the clubs at the very, very tippy top of the financial fair play realm are going to have such an advantage over those clubs like a Newcastle trying to break in with new money, or Man United even at this point, if they do get purchased and have an influx of money, or the Evertons of the world that have had seamlessly endless amounts of money. When you have to compete week in and week out, you have to improve your first team, so the money just isn't there to spend on the academy. And I think that's where we could see a really big shift to non-English sides having much more elite academies. Granted, you'll have the Man Cities who have that endless income of revenue, and Spurs now are starting to compete with it, or Chelsea of 5 or 6 years ago. I think that's where winning Champions League or making far advancements in Europe year in and year out will allow you to have that kind of grace to spend money on the academy. But if you're a new club trying to break into it, if you're a Villa, if you're a West Ham, if you're a Newcastle, I think it's going to be really hard to build an elite academy without signing 12, 13-year-old players. Like we've seen Newcastle.
You can't do it overnight like you can in the transfer window for your first team. You can't build an academy.
Right, and we we've seen, like personally, it's the only team I can really speak to closely on the academy. We've seen Newcastle trying to pick scraps from Chelsea and Man City, who we've both signed academy players from in the last 2 years. But like, you're going to have to pick at scraps for a little bit because you do have to spend so much money on that first team. So it is kind of a really good example of the rich getting richer in the financial fair play world, where you just flat out have more money if you're earning more money in Europe, if you're earning more money commercially, to take a bit of a loss in the next 2 to 3 year window to then have these players ready for you in 2 or 3 years or 4 or 5 years, or sell them once they've really proven themselves on the U23 level, U21 level, what have you. So it is, I don't want to say the likes of Ajax and Benfica are going to be dying from the academy perspective, but I think we are going to see a really vast shift to a more Real Madrid, a Chelsea, a Man City.
I have a great
dominance of the academies.
Great direction to go from your point you just made. Soccer's the beautiful game. That's what it's, that's the romanticism calling card of the sport. I think this takes a lot of the romanticism out of the game. The fact that we know Ronaldo came from his Portuguese side. He didn't come through Madrid, or obviously didn't come from Juventus. Like, you look at the English national team now, Trent Alexander-Arnold didn't go out on any loans. He was at Liverpool all the way through. Bellingham was sold from his boyhood club at 17 to Dortmund. Harry Kane's really like the only one on that English side that went through this grind of the academy. You have to be a truly elite player to have that process streamlined. And that's just not where the good stories are to me. Thinking back to that video of Ajax and Benfica, it's like, that's part of the beauty of the sport, is just knowing that these, at the heart of the culture of these countries, they developed these players that went on to be world superstars. But the future for that sort of story might be more bleak. Obviously, you'll have some, but it won't be as common occurrence as it once was, knowing where Zlatan came from, where Messi was at Barcelona the whole time, but like Ronaldo, or just guys like Kevin De Bruyne, Cole
Holland, even Holland cut his teeth in Norway, or at Molde. Where's Molde? Whatever. Yeah, at Molde. Like you have those guys that had to cut their teeth on their own country, in their own country's league, in that academy, and I think that is going to be very, very few and far between moving forward. And it is kind of a shame, because as we get richer, I think it will only separate even further, especially on the European level, because that is how the Ajax have competed for so long in Europe. It is building from within, finding those hidden gems. And if Man City, Real Madrid, Bayern, Barcelona, maybe not Barcelona, have the funds in financial fair play and just the overall funds to make that happen, to buy those guys when they're so young, you will see less of those European Cinderella stories. I think far gone are the days that we see an Ajax compete for a Champions League. I think we've probably passed that 4 or 5, 10 years ago, but I don't think there's any coming back.
We were responsible for the end of that. I feel like that was Ajax's last deep run. But no, you're exactly right. I think the future of the romantic stories, or the evolution of the romantic stories, is you get a guy that's under contract with Madrid. Maybe they'll send him to Ajax for a year on loan, but that's just sad. Like, you want Ajax to be able to.
But like, will they though? Even
I don't know. If you want, so I guess I should have started at this point. What good does a Premier League 18-year-old going on loan to Port Vale for a year? What does that do for his career? Nothing.
No, at this point, that loan move is seen as a guy we're giving up on. We're trying to get him to prove himself, to sell him for 20 mil next year. We don't have room
for him in the locker room or something like that.
Right. There's no room for him in our academy. No. He's aged out of our academy. There's no room in the first team. So we're now trying to just ship him out to Port Vale, as you said, and hopefully sell him for 10 or 15 mil next summer to just inject that into our first team. And that is some of the romanticism, like you said, is dying away, because those moves are not in the player's best interest anymore. They're not in the club's best interest anymore. It really is seen as step backwards if you're an academy or recent academy
I think that's
graduate,
the connotation of
getting
it for
loaned
sure.
to a championship or a League One or a League Two side.
Yeah.
Right now, if you have somebody that is a recent academy graduate or an 18 or a 19-year-old, you need to see them with a move to an Augsburg. I hate that because that popped
PSV
up in my head because of Pepe.
Maybe somebody,
but PSV is not in my head a club that should be just taking loan guys for a year to develop, and then they see no riches from it.
Yeah.
They may see riches from it from a league perspective, where it just keeps them good enough to qualify for Champions League next year. But then they need to reload. We just saw what that did to Sheffield. They got their promotion off of loan players, and now we've seen as soon as those loan players leave, it's a massive drop off. And
we thought that was going to happen with Forest, but somehow they weathered the storm because they had a shit ton of loan players.
Because
also.
they spent a gajillion dollars.
Yeah, that's true.
But that's the thing. Like, you have to have that money injected to stay relevant in your own league. So where is that even necessarily overly advantageous for a PSV or an Ajax to take on a loan player for a year, finish top 3, and then we got to go through the whole loan process again. We got to re-inject these guys into our system. And like you said, if you're a loaning club, you almost need to find, I know it's super frowned upon right now, but like almost those parent clubs, like where we have the same style, we have the same mindset of development. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that.
Hey, Paul Neris, you want to come be Tottenham's system club?
Right. I'll take River Plate at Newcastle, please and thank you.
That's a good shout.
But we'll see more of that where you're just going to find, not even necessarily through ownership, but like just philosophically clubs that you match. But with how much
like
we're
a
seeing
pseudo minor league system. The minor league teams are independently owned, but they're under the branch.
Yeah, and that's just so much less fun from a global or not even global, a European perspective, where I don't want Ajax to just become a feeder club to United. And I'm not just that popped to my head because of the manager, obviously, but like I don't want that. And others.
A lot of money spent on others.
I don't want that to just to become the norm. I don't want like an Ajax or a Man U mini playing at Eredivisie. I don't want a Bayern mini playing in, the Portuguese league. Like that's way less fun.
It is.
It takes a whole dynamic out of recruitment, because if you do just see those loans from the big clubs always going to the same couple of teams because it fits their personnel, fits their profile, fits their management style, it takes some of that beautiful game out of it. It takes some of that recruitment process out of it. And I don't want to wake up 3 years from now and see Ajax where 7 of their 11 starters in Champions League are all loan players. And I do feel like that's kind of where we're headed.
So counterpoint, I agree completely with what you're saying, but counterpoint to that is I think we might get to the point where that option is the only option that's in everybody's best interest, even fractionally.
Yeah.
The player's best interest is obviously going to be Ajax over Port Vale.
Starting.
The parent club's best interest is going to be sending them to a competitive environment. And then those clubs will benefit, albeit short term, off of an elite 18-year-old coming and playing for them. But I do agree, it just takes away so much of the beautiful game aspect of it. That's
the thing, though. Like that short term is like at some point, why is it going to be in Ajax's best interest to take on the salary or part of salaries, or is it going to turn into where we see the U21 league in the Premier League becoming a farm system, essentially? Like, am I going to care more about watching Newcastle U21s than I care about watching Aloni at Feyenoord? Like, I don't want that to be the case.
That's a huge economic opportunity for English soccer, by the way. Like, if it was readily available, I would be all over Tottenham's U21 games if I could find a way to watch them.
It massively from the English side, and I get from an English perspective why you would go that route, but from a continental interest in the game, that'll not kill Champions League, but that will severely hinder competitiveness in Champions League, and then that'll severely hinder even domestic interest. Like, if you're an Ajax fan, how much are you really going to care if you know that the U21s of Spurs could just come in and wax Ajax?
They probably could this year, to be honest.
You still have that innate love for your club, and that will likely never go away. But how far are we from the Eredivisie or the Portuguese league becoming less than a U21 Prem League? And that's what's scary to me. And I think you lose a lot of that creativeness, and in the same respect, you lose a lot of the ability for those Dutch, Portuguese. I hate that I keep going back to those two, but they're probably the two best examples of developmental leagues, if you will. Where do you lose
historically that developmental? Before I forget this point that I want to make, my mind doesn't automatically go to the Eredivisie or the Portuguese league. It goes to Copenhagen, to Braga, to the Belgian league, the Denmark league.
Even more so. Yeah.
I feel like it would benefit those leagues to get, say, like a Jude Bellingham. He didn't go on loan, but a guy like that on loan for a year or two while he's 17, 18, knowing he's going to go back to Man City, that elevates everybody in that league, which I think that's the best case scenario. The worst case scenario is seeing a proud organization like Ajax be reduced to this farm system, which is
relegation.
Sad. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's what's just really tough for me. Like, I love what...
Or how dope would it be for the Greek league to just be lit with all these... Like, the perspective of that sounds cool, but there are so many other ripple effects that it affects so much, because there's just so many cause and effect relationships in continental soccer.
Yeah, and I would almost argue that maybe from a domestic perspective, if you are, the Greek Football Federation, maybe you don't want those loan guys, because maybe you want, if Champions League is going to stay this, we're giving every nation's league entrance into our Champions League. Maybe you don't want those loan guys. Maybe you want even if you don't advance out of the group stage, maybe you want your Greek 20-year-old, 18-year-old playing in the Champions League.
Potentially, but money talks. And if one of those guys can help you win, then
it's such a weird concept, because it's so hard to balance it from like an American athletics perspective, especially both of us coming so deeply from baseball, where the farm system is a thing, and essentially AAA is your U23 team and AA is your U21 team, and like to us it does seem normal, but that's part of what I love about soccer is the
unpredictability.
Newcastle has 2 or 3 guys right now out on loan in Champions League, and like I want them to get that exposure and that success, but where is that break even point? Because at some point you're those smaller, and I will say smaller clubs like Newcastle at this point in time, will they be able to afford to loan those guys out if this U21 push becomes so prevalent in England? And I do think that's kind of where we're going. Is I almost do think 10 years from now we're going to have people, maybe not me, because I don't know if I have that kind of time and patience in my day, watching U21 Prem games. Is that going to be something ESPN Plus starts picking up? Because that's where the next great talent is, rather than in the Eredivisie or in the Portuguese league or in the
Saudi
league. Or in the Norwegian league or the Swiss league.
Start your career in the Dutch league, you end it in the Saudi league. That's how you know you're an all-timer.
You just don't want Santi Jimenez ending up at Tottenham, but that's a topic for a different day. It is a very interesting concept, though, and I think one that's ever evolving.
Absolutely.
And I before we recorded, I pulled up because I wanted to kind of understand, like, where is everybody's next best talent? Who are they? And what are they doing currently? And when you look at it, a lot of the Prem from last year, so last season, so 22-23, not 23-24.
I've tried to forget
a lot of them are still with their parent club and not necessarily out on loan. And I think that's something that could hinder European football growth as a whole, but something that is obviously proving to quite potentially be beneficial to the English game. And I do think Brexit has a large influence on that, unfortunately.
The rich get richer.
politics aside, from a footballing perspective, I think it does kind of more lead to the rich getting richer. And I think, as wild as it is, Brexit is going to play a huge role into the academy.
We'll do a deeper dive into that, and because that's a really like influential thing that happened several years ago that we in America just don't think about,
don't understand.
Because England's downfall on the international stage started when they kind of shut themselves off from other ideas and didn't bring any foreign ideas or talent. And if they're not careful, it could go back, lean towards that way. This is a conversation that will be ongoing. I had a lot more fun recording this one than I thought I would, just because I didn't know if we could
I did too, because I'm not an Academy guy, especially as a Newcastle fan. My
there was a lot to talk about.
It's such a good Discord, though. It's such a good back and forth, and there's lots of. It's so fluid, and that's another thing that I do like, and you've touched on this in past episodes. The fluidity due to geopolitical and cultural aspects in European football is so incredibly foreign to American fans. If you don't like the college football system where, like you said, you go play at Bama for 3 years, get drafted, and then all of a sudden you're a star, like, it is very complex and very much the antithesis of American sports. And it is hard to grasp. I haven't fully grasped it yet. And we've said time and time again, part of the purpose of this show is to grow together, you and I, and to grow with our audience. And I think this is just a really good example of that.
It's our visual journal of learning the sport, which I think we always have to remind ourselves and our audience, because we don't know everything. We're learning every day, but this is such a fun aspect to dive into, because it is, like you said, the antithesis of everything we know about player development in America. You say you went and looked at some like upcoming prospects in the lower ranks. You stumble upon Mikey Moore for Tottenham.
I did.
8 goals, 5 assists in 7 games. Kid's electric.
Not bad.
Yeah, not bad.
And then there's Lewis Miley was our number one, the one you said you had never heard of, and he's getting starts. But again, like it is a Newcastle having to keep that, because Newcastle is newer at that academy, that player development, because we are so young, so fresh in the upper echelon of financial football. But it is super interesting to kind of look at the impact that where you go, what academy you select will have or sign with as a young player will have vast ripple effects. Shout out James Alcott on your future development, and that's a really good example.
Yeah, and something we didn't even mention is that Man City's going to pay a youth player way more than Bristol City will. So already right away your check's going to be bigger. So why not just go for that? Dylan, you guys went from 19th to 10th during your takeover. You can't build an academy that fast.
You cannot.
So it's going to be an interesting journey for you guys, but I'm sure one that you'll see from the ground up, and I'm sure you guys will be fine. And it seems like I've got a bunch of good heads in that front office. That's based. I don't know what soccer is called.
Front office. Sure. The American version.
Guys, we appreciate y'all listening. This was an interesting one for us to cover because it's kind of out of our comfort zone. We're not talking jokes and on-field performances. We're making fun of Man United. So
I was going to say, I didn't rip on Man United or Chelsea today. So this is they
were actually two heroes of this story.
Yeah, absolutely.
We will do more episodes on the academies. We will get experts on that know more about it than us. We will dive into the business of sports, how maybe Muslim law or Muslim ethics might affect Newcastle and their debt in the future. We're going to have Nick back on. I'm going to try to get with the Lily White Lab guys, use their connections. We're going to try to get some guests on. We've been saying that for a long time, but I feel like we're really
this year
we're getting it now. So we appreciate you.
Got our feet under us. We're ready to rock.
We appreciate you guys listening. Make sure to subscribe, like, comment, share with your friends, family, all of that. We'll talk to you all next time.